Welcome to Authentic Educators, a podcast by teachers for teachers about best lessons, favorite classroom moments, and strategies you can implement today. My name is Cody Crook, and in today's episode, we are joined by Karen Miller to discuss an amazing moment she had in her middle school English class that has inspired her students to face challenges without giving up. Classrooms across the world have both benefited from and struggled with the advancement of technology. Students today are the first generation of human beings to have grown up with the internet and its millions of apps at their fingertips. Instant gratification is a click or tap away. Consequently, many students have lost the ability to take on an important component of learning, struggle. Instead of bearing down and taking on experiences that push them, it is much easier to give up or give in. Our conversation with Karen highlights something that she discussed with her seventh graders that is as extraordinary as it is obvious. Teachers of all grades and disciplines will benefit from this episode. We hope you enjoy. So Karen, I remember being in a faculty meeting a couple of weeks ago, and one of your co-teachers shouted you out in a good way for a really phenomenal experience that happened in your classroom. And so Dave and I are super excited to chat with you today about what that was and how it can benefit really all students. I know that you're eighth grade English, but the more I was thinking about after I learned what you're doing, it's all middle school, it's all high school, and honestly, even some elementary school. So can you let us know what you were doing that day, where the magic was, and the amazing results that you got out of it?
Sure. It was really impromptu. So the day's lesson was a writing lesson because I teach eighth grade English. We do a writing-based practice, so we do a lot of writing. It's the primary focus of our curriculum. So I was driving to school, and I'm really I'm sure like both of you, a lifelong learner. I'm always, my life's passion is really like, how can we be better humans? And, for me personally, and then also for, anything I can impart to my own kids and to my students. And so I'm driving to school listening to the Huberman podcast, which is pretty typical in my genre of things that I listen to.
Great podcast, by the way.
I saw Dave nodding immediately.
Yes. And he had Dr. Becky Kennedy on, and she is a psychologist in the world of parenting. So I was, just listening for my own personal information, really not even thinking about it in terms of teaching. And they started talking about something that just hit me so hard, I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so with my students, they know I'm always going to be imparting like lifelong wisdom to them, not just, curriculum-based things. So when I came in that day, this wasn't like abnormal for me to be like, I just learned something and you all need to know this, It's like a pretty typical thing. So it's the beginning of class, and I couldn't stop processing it. So we read for our 10 minutes like we typically do, again, trying to get them to be lifelong readers, find things they love to read about. And I knew I was going to get a lot of pushback for that day's lesson because it was kind of earlier in the year. And it was one of the first times they were going to have to write for like 20 or 30 minutes in a journal with like a pencil or a pen. And I knew it was going to be hard for some of them.
Their hands are going to hurt. They're going to want to go to the bathroom. They're going to stare around aimlessly, all that stuff that I'm sure most teachers can relate to.
Right. And I think this generation, really struggles with doing hard things and things that are uncomfortable or that they don't like. And I really never understood why. And I'm sure you guys are like that too. Like, is everybody just getting weak? Like, what is happening with kids? Like, it was super confusing to me. And this podcast between Dr. Becky Kennedy and Dr. Andrew Huberman, like, changed my whole philosophy and understanding, honestly, of it. Mm-hmm. Okay. So do you want me to tell what I said to the kids?
Yeah. So is this like a vision where, they finish their independent reading and then you're just like bubbling with, I need to share this with you, right? Like, is this,
yes,
that's the setup?
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So okay. Tell us what you told them.
Okay. All right. I'll tell you. So to me, like, and I'm sure with both of you, the whole purpose of teaching is like they have to understand the why or they don't buy into any of it.
Absolutely.
I think every single lesson should have a why. The kids should know it and they should believe it and it should be of value to them, right? So I don't want anybody wasting my time. I don't want to waste their time. That's like the bottom line in the classroom. So typically when I'm telling them something, they're listening because they know there's a reason for it. So I said to them, I told them how I listened to this podcast this morning and I couldn't stop thinking about all of my students and how like in the world today, they don't really know how to deal with frustration anymore. In the way that we were brought up and historically of all time, right? Because they are the first generation to have been born with essentially a cell phone, a computer in their hands from the time that they were, babies. And so they're kind of like the guinea pig generation of all of this technology, right? So they're 13 and 14 years old. And my two older kids, so I have a 13-year-old, but I also have a 19 and 21-year-old, and they really didn't get immersed with this until they were like in middle school. So it was a little different. Their younger years were different. And so Dr. Becky Kennedy explained why on a physiological level this is happening to kids. So she said, in today's world, there's immediate gratification around everything. There is no like wait time for anything worthwhile. And so she gave a great example of Blockbuster, right? Like when we were kids, I don't know, I'm older than you guys.
No, Blockbuster is a thing for me.
Yeah, we went to
Dave, what about
Blockbuster.
Yeah, Blockbuster too.
Right? So you were like, oh my gosh, I hope they have this. I hope my parents can take me. I hope they have the movie I want. And it might be like weeks before you get to see something, right? Versus today. And then you might get there and they might not have it. And then you have to change your mind and you have to feel kind of disappointed and you have to think about what else you want. And then today we have Netflix and every other streaming app that's immediately like, I can get what I want. I don't have to really wait for things, right? There's none of that. And same with like Amazon. She didn't talk about this, but I kept thinking about it, like if I want something, it could be at my house today at 4:00. That's it. Right. I got it. I didn't have to go anywhere. I didn't have to like work hard for it. I didn't have to wait. And so what has happened is
Quick question, Karen. Were you getting like, because I'm just compelled listening to those anecdotes.
Yeah.
As you were saying that, like, were you witnessing kids kind of like buying in, nodding their heads, being like, this tracks, like this connects with me. So now I'm going to, you got the fish hook in. What more do you have to say, Mrs. Miller?
Well, and I also had to explain what Blockbuster was, right? Because I literally didn't even know. And they were like, you had to drive to a store to like get a movie? And I was like, yes.
Imagine having to go to Best Buy to buy CDs to listen to music on demand, right?
Right. Like so many things that we don't even think about it. And they were talking about how we as adults are suffering from this as well, right? Like this is not just a young kid thing, except they don't know any different. So what has happened is their brain circuitry has changed. So then, of course, I had to explain to the kids, like, that's the process. It's a processing kind of, I said to them, like, think of these little like channels or circuits that are built up and help you process the way you do things. And their processing of hard things is when it's hard, I should be able to fix it and figure it out right away. Or if I'm playing a little video game and I ask them, like, how many of you, when you were little, would like have your parents' phone or an iPad? And it could be like any little video game. And then like you win a star and you feel so happy about it. And they were all like, yeah. And I'm like, and still like 13 and 14-year-olds in our school love playing on their computer. And some of them like literally punch their computer screen because they don't get a star. They throw their computer down, right? Or they're cheering if they like win whatever silly game they've been able to like figure out how to get on their Chromebook, despite all of technology department trying to figure out how not to, right? It's immediate, all of this gratification.
Right.
And when they don't get what they want, the frustration is really high. Like I've seen kids punch their screen over not getting a star or winning that round of something kind of not even worthwhile, right?
Right. Yeah, they didn't not make a varsity team, right? It's just a game on a screen that they didn't get a high score at.
Exactly. That they didn't even have to work hard for to begin with, right? Because those games are just silly.
Right.
So I said to them, what's interesting is, so now you go from this is hard. I'm either mad, I'm quitting, I'm giving up, or I'm going to win and feel really good immediately. And
Right.
you didn't have to do anything hard. And they're all like, hmm. But I quickly followed up with like, none of this is your fault. Like, I'm not saying this to you to make you feel bad. None of this is your fault. This is just, you are a byproduct of what has happened in our society with
Sure.
technology, and your brains have been wired differently as a result.
You're just opening
So,
their eyes, right? Being like, hey, guess
right.
what? Like, this is happening.
Yeah,
It's
this is
not your fault.
happening. And knowledge is power, right? So, like, I want them to understand this is what has happened, but how do we fix it? And what's really exciting is that they can fix it. They're the only ones who can fix it.
Mhm.
And so I was like, it's not your parents' fault. It's not your teacher's fault. Like, don't go home mad at your parents. They didn't know any better, right? We're a generation of parents who are dealing with this for the first time too, and learning how to navigate it. And studies are just coming out, and all this information is coming out about how it's, a lot of it can be pretty negative, and clearly not all of it. And then she went into, and I was telling the kids this, there's this idea of new information and then owning that information, right? Those are two separate things. Like, I'm learning some new information, and now I own it, I master it, I get it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this whole space in between. And she calls it the quote unquote learning space. And she said the learning space is supposed to be hard, but they don't really know how to handle that learning space anymore, because they want to go from here's new information. I want to own it. I want to win. I want the star, whatever it is.
Right.
And so she said it's presented on like the elementary school level, really with reading. And this is where, like, as an English teacher, I was like, what? She said so many people are getting their kids tested because they think they have a reading problem because they're not learning how to read. And all the kids were looking at me. And I was like, so I'm not saying some people don't have legitimate reading issues or dyslexia, or, of course that still exists. Right. That's a thing. But all these kids are getting tested and nothing's wrong. And what they've started to realize is it's the frustration tolerance, because learning to read is hard. I remember it with my oldest thinking at that point, I was a high school, teacher, and I'd like written books about SAT, ACT, trained teachers all over the country. And I didn't even know how to teach my own kid how to read, because I was like, this is a whole different thing. Like, no parent really learns how to teach their kid how to read. And so, like, we just know how to read. And obviously elementary school teachers do, and reading specialists do. But I saw the frustration with my own kid. I remember it, that it was so frustrating to learn how to read. So that really hit home with me. But what's happened now is, as parents, we've also have less tolerance for frustration. So we think something's wrong. My kid doesn't know how to read. And then we go get them tested. But no, actually, it's not that they don't know how to read. It's they don't know how to tolerate us as parents, or them as students, that learning process. And so I was saying to the kids, that middle learning space is what we have to really build. We have to be able to sit in the uncomfortableness of not wanting to do something. And and they were like, oh. And I said, like that. Nobody wants that.
Right.
Nobody wants to do that.
So a analogy I use all the time with kids with reading is, I think it works so well to connect this to almost exercise, because your
Oh, yeah.
brain is a muscle and you need to get the reps to build that muscle. And if you want to lose 20 pounds, you can't get that in a day. You can't get that in 20 minutes. You can't get that by clicking a button. You need hard, consistent work where you won't see any results for a decent chunk of time.
Totally.
And it might actually take a full year to lose 20 pounds. It might actually take 2 years to build the body that you want. Man, Karen, you're sharing a lot of great stuff. I have a million connections, and I'll try not to share all of them because I'll derail where you're going. But there's a book I read before called Brain Rules, and the author is escaping me. And in that book, they literally talk about how kids' brains are rewired today because of the internet and YouTube and
All of it.
computers.
Right.
And that's something that we as adults almost have to reckon with, is they have a different brain structure than we do.
Correct.
And again, I love your piece. I love, love, love your piece that you have a different brain than us, and that's not your fault. It just is what it
No.
is. So we as teachers, where we come into play is we need to address that and teach them this is the reality. And I love the agency you give them, which it becomes a I'm here to help you. I care about you. I want you to be the best version of yourself as possible.
Yeah, there's no
Um,
scapegoating, right? It's
Right.
right, but you need to learn how to do hard things. And there's this kind of cliche I've heard before, and it's basically choose your hard. And it's sort of like
Yeah.
being, in bad shape and being unhealthy is hard, and doing all the work that it takes to be healthy and in shape is also hard. You have a choice.
Mhm.
right.
Not knowing how to read is hard, but
Hmm.
working on the discipline and the time and the focus it takes to read and to then have a thought and to write it down, like that's also hard. You have a choice.
Mhm.
Yep.
And it's almost like teaching the kids to make the choice to, instead of giving up instantly, to grind, because that to me is the secret sauce of education, which is the connection you can make. That's transferable to literally everything, right?
Everything.
Like you
Yeah.
can connect that dot to anything you want to get better
Yep.
at. It's
Right.
sort of you
Totally.
have a choice. Um, One will be easier, but
Right.
not as rewarding, and
Like
the other will be hard and lead to obviously a much better outcome.
fixing your car is hard. Spending a lot of money for somebody else to fix your car is also hard, right? And you can't
Correct.
just like snap your fingers and learn how to fix something that's in your engine.
I
So
will say I'm always going to take my car to the body shop, though. I don't trust myself to fix a car.
so Karen, after you're giving
You're
this
choosing your hard, right? You're
right,
choosing your
after you're
hard.
giving them this speech, right, and you're kind of like nodding along, and I can just like picture you in the classroom, like, passionately, like pleading with them to try to
Yes.
improve them. How did you then? What was the transition to the activity that you were doing that day, and what results did you notice, presumably because of your Karen pep talk?
Sure. So, um, I really, like Dave was saying, wanted to empower them to understand that this is really just about them, right? That this applies to every aspect of their life. And it's always a choice, right? Like you can choose not to do the hard and suffer the consequences, or you can choose to sit in the hard and do it and feel really good about yourself. And you can change the circuits of your brain, right?
Mm,
So
that's
if you
powerful,
do this long term,
right?
I told the kids, if you don't learn how to do this, the long-term consequences are big because we have a whole culture of people who are going to go into the workforce and not know how to do hard work. I said, and guess what? Every job, and my kids know I love my job, right? They all know it. Like there's parts of this job I don't love, I hate. And they're like, oh. I said, but I have to do it because it's my job, right? Like I can't be like, well, I hate this, so I'm not doing that. Then I would get fired and then I wouldn't have the job I really love because there's parts of it that are really hard.
Wow. Yeah.
So I was like, so today's going to be something that's going to be really hard for people. Other people are going to love today's lesson. And I said, but some of you aren't. And I know that, and that's okay. So what we're going to do is when we get our notebooks out, and I was having them handwrite, which is also hard, right? They want to be on the technology, they want to be on the computer, but
Hmm.
they get super distracted. And I wanted a space where they could just have like quiet music playing, and it's just them and the pencil and the paper, and they had to think and they had to work hard.
Mm.
And so I said, so you're going to have to sit in the, and you know what I wanted to say. And then I was like, oh, you're going to have to sit. I was like, you're going to have to sit in the difficulty and you're just going to have to sit there. And you're not going to want to sit there. You're going to want to go to the bathroom. You're going to want to give up. You're going to want to stare out the window. I said, that's fine. Go to the bathroom, give up, stare out the window, but you can come back to it. You got to come back. I was like, because you got to do it. I'm not doing it. Mrs. Bald, who's my learning support teacher, she's not doing this for you. Nobody is doing this for you. Nobody is helping you at all. You're going to sit and be really uncomfortable and eventually write at least a full page, if not more. And I said, and you're going to do it for you. Not for me, not for Mrs. Bald, not for your parents. You're going to do it for you because you're going to start today trying to do hard things.
And
And
your
they were
future you, right? Your present you and your adult you,
right.
right?
And they were all like, okay. And every one of them sat there for 30 minutes. Some for the first 5 minutes just sat there. Like, I think part of
processing
them was like, yeah, processing like everything I just said too, because like they really wanted to complain and they were like, how do I complain after that?
it's
You
tough.
know, it's tough.
Yeah.
And then I said, I'm really proud of the people who are just sitting there not writing right now. I said, because this is hard for you and you're sitting in it.
So you acknowledged that and you said that.
Yep.
And I think that connects to the whole reading and writing or writing as a process. That's part of the process is sitting there with a thought and not fidgeting
Totally.
because you're doing nothing. And I love
Right.
that you acknowledge those kids in particular.
Yes. And so it was really cute too, because those kids felt so validated. They're like, yeah, I'm just sitting here. Look at me. I'm doing great. I'm doing nothing, but I am doing great. And by the end of class, everybody had written, even our kids with IEPs who say, have writing goals and are writing resistant and everything. And that's why Jackie said something to the principal about it, because she could not believe it was like one of the first times that she didn't have to pull someone in the hallway and prompt them
Right.
and motivate them. They all were just writing. And so they were writing and writing and writing. And at the end, I was like, don't you guys feel good? And we all clapped, like the whole class. And I was
Yeah.
like, because it feels good to do something hard. And we're going to work on it all the time. And on my backboard, I have like, you can do hard things. And then you have to, like, you have to do it. It's like, not that your life depends on it, but your future self's ability to be successful, to do things that are difficult depends on it. So it was really exciting, and it's transferred because I talk about it all the time, right? And I'll acknowledge the
You call back
difficult.
to it and
Yeah,
have the kids, because obviously, you're never going to get 100% of students that hear something wonderful like that and then go as changed human beings, right? Like that's not a realistic expectation. But
no.
we're recording this episode in December. I want to say this was maybe an October or November thing that I remember hearing
Yeah, I
about
think
it.
it was like an October thing.
Have you seen at least a fair amount of consistency, not just because you're referencing it, but also because you think that a decent amount of them have internalized that lesson?
I hope so. It would be a cool reflection, like, for me to have them write about.
It'd be a good journal entry.
What I like
Yeah,
about this too is teaching is both, well, not both. It's many. It's coaching. It's being a motivational speaker. It's being a manager and a boss and a mentor. It's all of these things. And I know we're close to wrapping up, but I love, Karen, how you put on the board not only, or I forget if you said this was on the board or not, but you said you can, but also you have to,
Have
because
to. Yeah.
yeah, we have
that's
to.
that to me. If I were to ask you, how could you in a line or two sum up the big takeaway from this, and I'll let you do that if you'd like to, but I think this is any single class or setting, it's so applicable. And now that you had that really special moment in your room, it's probably
Mhm.
an easy thing to call back to and just say, hey guys, remember we can do hard things. And you
Mm-hmm.
can probably jolt them back to that moment and they can
Mm-hmm.
self-check and self-regulate and be like, oh yeah, she's right. I remember what she said. And
Right.
Yep.
so, I mean, if you have any sort of thoughts, I guess, to connect back to, I guess, how this can apply to any room or any lesson or any final ideas you want to share before Cody leads us out.
Yeah. So it was probably a month later, and the head of special ed came into my room during the same period that my learn support teacher was in there, and everybody's working. They were all typing and working on writing this analysis. And she went, "What's going on in here?" And I said, I said, well, they know that this is important, so they're doing it. And she just looked at me like, what? And I want to say, like, it's not me. Like, yeah, of course they do certain things for you as a teacher if they like you and they buy into you, but it's about empowering them to believe in themselves and
Yeah.
constantly reinforcing that. And then it transfers, right? So I mean, I don't know that it has transferred to every kid, but when they're in my room, in my space, they tend to, like, 99% of them do it.
It's awesome.
There's always the one or two who maybe they're just having a bad day or whatever the
Right.
case may be, right? There's never 100% buy-in, other than that one day where it was like literally 100% buy-in. It was freaky.
Right.
We were
Right.
both looking, Jackie and I kept looking at each other like, what is going on? It was
Yeah.
so magical. It was really cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I also think they're at an age that's essential. right? That they understand they're at that divergent path where they're either
Right.
going to go this way or that way, and we have to capture them. But I do
Yeah.
think it can apply to any age, and you just maybe have to present it a little bit differently.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Karen, for joining us on Authentic Educators.
You're
I
welcome.
had the
Thanks for
pleasure of
having
working
me.
with you for a year.
Yeah.
I missed that. And, for our listeners out there, just something that like I've been thinking about as Dave and I have had this podcast is, there are amazing things happening down the hall, the floor above you, the floor below you. And just to take the time with your colleagues to talk to each other about those awesome things that are happening, because it's really cool what a lot of people are doing for kids out there across the country and the world.
Yeah.
So thank you again for joining Authentic Educators, a podcast for teachers by teachers. This certainly was a favorite classroom moment and a best lesson and strategies that you can use today. We'll check in later. Thank you for listening, and thank you again to our guest, Karen Miller. Please reach out at authenticedpod@gmail.com if you have any questions or great ideas you'd like to share. If you enjoy what Dave and I are doing, the best way you can help us is to subscribe to, rate, and share our podcast. Our goal is to reach and help as many educators as possible, and that cannot happen without folks spreading the word. We appreciate your support. Until next time, this has been Authentic Educators, a podcast by teachers for teachers about best lessons, favorite classroom moments, and strategies you can implement today.